Before I get into this movie review, I wanted to say hello to everybody here on YouTube. My name is Mike. I do a podcast called Movie Mike's Movie Podcast. And if you come here and wonder, why wasn't there a new episode last week? Well, it's because I had some camera issues. But if for some reason there's ever not a video on the channel, you can always hear that week's movie review on my podcast, because not only do I do this segment here on YouTube, I do an entire movie podcast where all I do is talk about movies. I break down trailers. I talk about my favorite movies and a lot of movie exploration themes over there. So a lot of film history. If you're into that, go check out my podcast and subscribe. Would love to have you over there. But now let's get into our scheduled programming. About to get into a spoiler-free movie review. Let's talk about Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. That title is a mouthful. You could just call it Mission Impossible 7. A couple of things that I have holding me against fully loving this movie going into it. One, historically, I have not loved all of Tom Cruise's action movies. When I look to an action star, I don't really look to Tom Cruise. And it kind of conflicts with the way I feel with him as a person historically. But I try to separate the art from the artist. So I did that going into this movie, and I think I was able to do it. But over the course of these 7 films now, I haven't really loved any one of them in particular. Going back to 1996, that one was probably the best one in my opinion, because it was really the only time I cared about a Mission Impossible movie. But it's crazy now that Tom Cruise has been playing Ethan Hunt for over 27 years. And this one is by far some of the best action I have seen in any single Mission Impossible movie, which they had really gone out of my brain space for much of the 2000s. And it really wasn't until Ghost Protocol that they got on my radar again. But I would only watch them when they would come out on streaming. This was my first time in a very long time to go see a Mission Impossible movie in theaters, and I have to say, it is quite the ride. We have come a long way since 1996. So what this movie is about, Ethan Hunt and his team are back, and they are trying to track down this dangerous weapon before it gets into the hands of the wrong people. Essentially, they are trying to find this key, this very complex key, that in order to unlock something that it goes to, you have to have 2 different sides of the key. You put them together, and then they light up, and that is able to unlock something. And through the course of this film, you find out what exactly that is, why all these evil people are trying to get their hands on it, and all the mayhem that goes down in the process. So I got a little bit worried at the beginning of this movie. It had almost a cheesy tone to me. It reminded me more of the Mission Impossible TV show than what I wanted in a big Hollywood adaptation. But by the close of that opening sequence, that all went out the window, and it was a heck of an intro. There was a really big exclamation point that really got me invested in the story early on. And really, the plot line of this entire movie is pretty basic. But in this case, it actually works. So unlike in a Fast and the Furious franchise movie where it's just a bunch of big, dumb action, I really felt like Dead Reckoning Part 1 had a lot of refined action. It was almost as if Tom Cruise and the director sat down and watched a lot of Christopher Nolan movies. Maybe they watched Dunkirk, Tenet, and went back and watched Inception and thought, we need to take what Christopher Nolan does so well in his movies as far as the action aspect, not really try to make anything that cinematic, but take those action elements and put it into a Mission Impossible movie. So that is why I think this movie just sets itself apart. Because oftentimes when I go see an action movie, I think it's just going to be one of those movies where you turn your brain off, you watch a bunch of things explode and crash into each other, and that's really it. But for some reason, this movie felt a little bit different to me, like there was a lot of intention. And I think that really comes through in this movie, not so much with the plot line, but I think more with the characters, with their story, trying to add a little bit of an emotional element to it. Then, when you come in with all of the action, you can really bring it home. And I wouldn't say the cinematography in this movie is very artistic. It almost felt like watching a Nat Geo show. It almost felt like in moments that there was just a GoPro or like a really bare minimum camera attached to like the side of the car or attached to a motorcycle or in the big sequence that we were all waiting for from the trailer whenever Tom Cruise does that jump, it really felt like they were wanting to give you that feeling that you were a part of the action. And I think that's something Tom Cruise is really trying to bring home right now as well. It also had a decent amount of comedy. Now, it wasn't a lot of funny situations or like they were just writing jokes to fit in there. It was just these situations where the action was so intense. They had this little moment of levity. Another thing that really set this movie apart is there was much more of an emphasis on a score than there was just songs on a soundtrack. Unlike in a Fast and the Furious movie where you get a lot of EDM, dance music, late 90s, early 2000s songs, this movie was really intentional on the score. So it added this little bit of texture that made the action just seem a little bit more elegant. At times, when there was maybe a fight scene going on or just Tom Cruise running down an alley, I thought if you didn't have that music behind it, it would seem so cheesy and so unrealistic that if you just zoomed out as like a bystander looking at this situation, they'd be like, why is that guy running down the street so fast? Why are they fighting on a bridge? It would seem so weird, but that score makes all the difference. A couple of questions I had about Tom Cruise after watching this movie. I wonder if he runs in some kind of specialized shoe, because this is some of his best running to date. I know he's just become known for that of Tom Cruise running in movies. He runs really well, but he's always in like a full suit whenever he does this running. So I wonder if he has some dress shoes designed by Nike, because as a runner myself, I have to be in the right shoes to go for a run. And if ever I try any different shoes that I'm not used to, my feet get all blistered. So I always run in the exact same shoes. So I wonder if he has like some specially designed shoes that look like dress shoes but are actually running shoes. I was looking, they look like dress shoes to me. So if he doesn't, I give him an A plus for athleticism in this movie. I also wonder if he uses some kind of filter, since he has final say on the cut of this movie, because not only in this movie but also in Top Gun Maverick, he looks very shimmery, he looks very bright, he looks about 10 years younger in some of these shots compared to his co-stars. And he even made a statement last week that he thought about using de-aging for an opening sequence where it flashes back to him way back in the day. I think maybe they were going to even put him in the 80s and use some de-aging to make him look how old he was back in the 80s, but decided against it because he thought that in some aspects de-aging is good, but sometimes it's not the best. I'm not convinced he doesn't really use that in some of his movies now, because there are some scenes where I was paying attention to it and it kind of looked like there was a Snapchat filter on him. And my third question about Tom Cruise, I wonder, does he feel emotions anymore? Sometimes he feels a little bit robotic to me, and he does action movies well. We see him on the screen and he looks like he belongs there. But I wonder if over the course of his career being a superstar, being at this level that nobody else is at, if he's lost what it feels like to feel normal human emotions. There are sometimes he interacts with some of the other actors in this movie that it makes me think, like, is he a robot? Is he okay? Would he be able to do a rom-com in the 2020s? Or is he so far removed from feeling love that he wouldn't know how to do it anymore? Because there are some moments that I know I'm looking at one of the best actors of our lifetime, one of the most bangable Hollywood stars ever, but I wonder if he actually has the capabilities just to feel love, just to have the ability to connect emotionally with some other characters here, because I didn't really feel that from him. And a little bit, it kept me from humanizing Ethan Hunt whatsoever, which I don't really think you need that in this movie. You just need to have a character who is larger than life and able to do all these crazy things. So maybe it was just because the character didn't require it, but for me, I didn't see it in him. But one thing Tom Cruise does know is exactly what we want to see. He is kind of like Mr. Beast on YouTube, who is so good at making videos that get millions and millions of views because he gets right to it. He gets right to the action. He puts it in the title. What you see is what you get, and just has this really great pulse on what people want to see on the internet. Tom Cruise is like that with Hollywood. He backs it up with his commitment to stunts, which there was a lot of great stunts in this movie, and there were never really instances where I saw that he used a stunt double. So maybe they used it very specifically if they ended up making the final cut. But especially with that scene that we were all waiting for, the one where he makes that big jump and then parachutes onto the train that we saw in the trailer. That was such a great sequence, but there was also emotion and reasoning leading up to that moment. If you just threw that stunt in a random movie but had no context to it, it would be meaningless. But it really meant a lot to the movie. So it's not like this great scene just comes out of nowhere and just exists for the sake of existing. There was a lot leading up to that moment. And it looked so great on camera. And even though I had already seen it all over the trailer, I still really enjoyed that moment and was probably my favorite thing. It's kind of like the chorus in a song. You know it's coming, but once it gets there, you still want to sing along. That was that scene to me. Tom Cruise is also really good at finding great co stars, which every single co star in this movie was great, from Haley Atwell, who I really know as Agent Carter, S.I. Morales, who I know as Bob from La Bamba. The whole time he was on screen, I just wanted to scream, Richie! Simon Pegg, who has been a part of these movies since 2006, which is surprising to me, mainly because I still just see him as Shaun of the Dead, but he brought a lot of the comedic aspect to this movie. Vanessa Kirby was also really great in this movie. And of course, Ving Rhames. And the movie did pretty well at the box office. It opened on Wednesday of this past week and brought home $80 million dollars in the United States. And what I'm looking at now is $235 million dollars worldwide. So, an interesting move for them to open the movie on a Wednesday. I wonder if that was strategically done, knowing that an actor strike was coming and that once that hit, Tom Cruise wouldn't be able to promote the movie anymore, which is a pretty interesting wrinkle in a lot of movies coming out in the next 2 weeks, especially as we go into Barbie Oppenheimer. But overall, it's a pretty big win for Mission Impossible. Probably not going to achieve that same level of status as Top Gun 2, crossing that $1 billion mark. I just think there wasn't that much of a demand for another Mission Impossible movie, and that was much more of an event that this could ever be. It'll probably get in the 700, maybe $800 million mark at best, I would think. But the movie did leave me wanting more, and I went into it knowing it was a part one of two. Part two is scheduled to come out June 28th, 2024, next year. Again, not sure how the strike is going to affect that, which I thought we would be okay. But up until this last week, I didn't realize that if actors go on strike, they also can't promote their projects. So that is really the only reason I could see this being pushed back, maybe just a little bit, because the promotion was so heavy on this movie that if he wasn't able to promote it in the same way, there's no chance they're putting this out. You remember how many times they delayed Top Gun 2? They held on to that movie for like 2 years. And even at 2 hours and 43 minutes, it didn't feel that long to me. Now, I was left wanting more in the sense of I'm ready for part two, but I felt like at 2 hours and 43 minutes, that was all I needed here. It went by really quickly after it got started, a little bit slow in that opening sequence, and then just trying to establish a little bit of story at the start of the movie. But after that, it was pretty consistent, nonstop action throughout the entire movie, and had one of the best third acts in a blockbuster of this level that I've seen. There were moments that I was literally at the edge of my seat. Very rarely while watching an action movie do I think, are they going to be able to do this? Are they going to be able to pull this off? Is this the end for Ethan Hunt? That is how I felt, and that is the sign of a great action thriller. So for Dead Reckoning Part 1, I give it 4 out of 5 parachutes.